Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to one of the late afternoon sessions. My name is Doug Kobold, and I work for the County of Sacramento Department of Waste Management and Recycling. I have also the Vice Chair of the California Product Stewardship Council, the President of the National Stewardship Action Council, and I get the pleasure in introducing these four fine folks, and then they're going to give their presentations, and at the end we'll open it up for questions. So please hold your questions till after all four speakers have gone. Okay, so first up is Heidi Sanborn. And I should already know this by heart, but I'm going to read it just in case. So Heidi has been a leader in the solid waste industry in California for 23 years, working with industry, government, and the public to reduce waste, improve product design and recyclability, and implement cost-effective projects and policies which protect the health and the environment, human health and the environment.
Yep.
Please welcome Heidi.
Thanks, Doug, and I want to thank the Board for Product Stewardship Council and also now the National Stewardship Action Council. Doug and the board are amazing, and we could never take on these kinds of big paradigm changes without an absolutely amazing, thoughtful board. So I'm very grateful to work for them. So we were going to talk today about needles and medicines and all the policies and things that have been going on and what can you guys do. So I'm going to start and give an overview of kind of what's been happening in the big picture, and then all of our speakers are going to give their own specific stories and more about what's been happening in their jurisdictions after they've passed these EPR ordinances on medicines and sharps. And we have some exciting news that we'll let Tim give to you today about the latest ordinance that passed today. Yes, mystery. So our mission at the Product Stewardship Council is to shift the waste management system away from one that's just government funded and ratepayer financed to one that relies on producer responsibility to reduce public costs, but also ultimately to change design. If the producer must pay end-of-life costs and they are profit motivated, it makes sense that they would then look to reduce those end-of-life costs. And some exciting things that happened this last year is CPSC actually made a nice donation to As You Sow, and surprisingly, they went ahead and did a shareholder resolution to ask the pharmaceutical industries to start working on take back and stop fighting. So they filed shareholder resolutions with 3 U.S.-based pharma companies, Johnson & Johnson, Abbott Labs, and AbbVie, and started having that conversation internally. Is anybody familiar with As You Sow? Yeah, a few of you. They do really good work. They've been working on beverage containers for a long time and other things where they actually file shareholder resolutions who really own the company and that say, gee, company, we want you to start using recycled content in your pop bottles, Coca-Cola, or we want, AbbVie, why aren't you helping with needle and medicine collection like you do in other countries? Or could you please explain why you're not doing it in the U.S. and come up with a report, a corporate report, and put this as a metric in the sustainability plan. So that made big news, and they did a big press release, got a lot of interest, and when they start these conversations, it actually is a back and forth with the company. They file and say, we're going to file the shareholder resolution, we'd like to have your input first, and the company says, hey, but our Humira drug has a return for the safe needles, and then they say, hey, that's kind of cool, why don't you do that for the other product lines? And they start this whole back and forth with them. So it's really a healthy way to start a conversation from the inside of a company. And that was something our board thought was important to start. The other thing that happened is I went with, as you know, Alameda County passed the first ordinance in 2012. It was litigated by pharma industries all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Alameda won. You all won, because now you can all go ahead and do EPR for ordinances, for anything that's hazardous, and feel safe to do that. Attorney Art Sharstis, who actually was their attorney, he came with me to Chicago to speak to the U.S. Conference of Mayors and gave the higher echelon folks in waste management for some of the biggest cities in the country the explanation that this was a paradigm change. This was a landmark decision of the highest order in our industry. And Art explained it as, you are safe to do EPR on anything hazardous that has public health impacts. If you go outside of that realm, you're at risk. They could challenge it and you might lose. So for example, can you make the case that EPR for packaging has significant environmental and public health impacts? Maybe. Maybe you can, but somebody might argue that they can't, and then you're in litigation. So, but with mercury thermostats, and hazardous products, it's easy to make that case, or needles or meds. But the other ones, it's just getting into a little bit more of a gray area. But this is a very big deal. So we formed the National Stewardship Action Council this year, and again, Doug is the president of that board, because we needed a C4 organization that could do unlimited lobbying. Unfortunately, this issue has become a little bit combative, and so it takes a lot of time to advocate for it, and that means we needed a different organization to do that, and we needed to be able to parachute in and help other cities who are asking for it, like Chicago. If we've learned all these amazing lessons amongst these counties and the process that we've gone through here, that we did not want it lost when others went into battle with one of the biggest lobbies there is, and that's the pharmaceutical industry. So we've been also doing a lot of inserts, and if you came to our booth, we do educational inserts. We work with the news and review team, and they called them advertorials. It looks like a press story, and it kind of is, but we paid them to do it. And so what we did was the latest two this year were Alameda County on the right and Santa Clara County on the left. They're a little bit different, totally customized for each county. If any of you are interested in one of these, we can do them for medicines and sharps, one or the other, all of hazardous waste. You just let us know. But we've got this down to a science where we manage the PR team there, and we highlight local stories. So, for example, we'll have a picture of a family who's lost a kid who started on their drug addiction path from getting them in the home, or, the water, quote, the water quality person talking about pharmaceuticals in their water. And then share what to do and where the locations are now to bring those things. And we did that with San Mateo, and we didn't do it with the other two counties here. We did it with Marin, and this has been very, very, I think, neat, because it brings everybody in the county together, like public health, environmental health, the drug abuse prevention groups, the water people, and they all see the law enforcement. They all go, this is a way bigger problem than just my part of this. And then they realize it's a big community issue, and they get really, really engaged and want to solve it. So again, little history, Alameda County. Does anybody not hear about this case? I didn't think so. So we'll skip right through it. But we consider those folks, the Alameda County supervisors, to be the champions of product stewardship, because they spent a lot of money, a lot of energy, and a lot of time getting this done and making sure all of you have the tool, the legal tool now to use to drive this conversation, because the pharma industry has been able to kill these bills at the state level to date. And then King County, Washington passed right after Alameda. They were part of the lawsuit. They added over-the-counter drugs, and we're just going to send around tomorrow an update on where they are. They had full implementation was supposed to happen as of July. So I got the email. I'll be forwarding it to our listserv. If any of you are not on our pharmaceutical listserv and would like to be, please give me your card and let's talk. But, again, the pharma industry still is of the mind that it's still household trash is the best alternative. And the other thing we found out in these cases is that if you want to tell them not to tell the public to throw it in the trash, if you pass an EPR ordinance in their public education materials, you have to make it illegal to put it in the trash, because right now they would litigate if you told them not to, because it's currently legal for most drugs to go in the trash. So that's counterintuitive, right? People think, we'd be telling them to not flush them and to put them in the bins, but there's nothing to say that they can't tell them what to do is legal, which is currently throw them in the trash. And again, that's our Churstis in the inset there. He was arguing the case, and that was at the Federal Ninth Circuit. And it's on our website, that video, 45 minutes. It's a really, really, really good video. Did you get to watch it? Isn't it great? You just sit there, and it's like, these smart people all talking about EPR, and they really get it. It was fun. So Senator Jackson, she is the one who carried the pharmaceutical producer responsibility bill for years, and she finally gave up and said, we're going to do what Senator Padilla did with bags. We're going to send out a letter to every local government in the state and say, you guys got to do this from the bottom up, because we can't get there from the state down. And that's what she sent out to every county supervisor in the state. And that has led now to San Francisco, San Mateo, Marin, Santa Clara, Santa Cruz, Santa Barbara, LA's on the back burner because Pharma went nuts on them, but it's going to come back. And then I've got 3 counties that are rurals that are now confabbing about it, and several others talking about it. So I have a feeling we're going to have, and we've got a new one that we'll talk about, a city that I think passed it today on second reading in Santa Cruz, pharmaceuticals and sharps. So that's really exciting. So you're all being empowered to go out there and drive policy from the bottom up, just like the bag ban. It's now we're at the state level and dealing with the proposition. The same is going to be with these big lobbies. It has to be a groundswell to get some action. And of course, we were on NPR and all that good stuff. And this was San Francisco, Supervisor London Breed, who's a real environmentalist. She's wonderful. There's Waymond starring in his role in the video at San Mateo. Rob Dorsey in Santa Clara County, who used to be actually a founding chair of our board at CPSC. And of course, the Supreme Court denied the petition to be heard. And by the way, Art said at the U.S. Conference of Mayors that when somebody asks for the Supreme Court to take up a case, the average is about a 1 in 70 chance they'll take it up. If the U.S. Chamber of Commerce files an amicus brief in favor of the petitioner, apparently it changes to 1 in 3. We were very nervous. And not on top of that, somebody in the industry actually let out of the bag through the Wall Street Journal that there were 10 counties in California that were considering this that hadn't gone public yet. And we didn't want that out because that makes it political. And then that gives and it came out like 3 days before the court decided to deny the case. We're just like, oh, thankfully they denied it. So, and then Marin went and did their ordinance with a 5-0 vote. So you can see the pattern. These are all unanimous so far. And then Santa Cruz County, and Tim and his gang, they all went and they added medical sharps, which is what they do in Ontario, Canada. They regulated them as the same because most people that get their medicines and sharps from the same person, the pharmacist, the same doctor, they all consider a medical supply, deal with them the same way. So this is Craig Hampel from the city of Burbank, who's also on the CPSC board, and he was testifying there at one of the many, many hearings that we had in Los Angeles. Unfortunately, the pharma industry really hired every lobbyist they could that knew somebody and played golf with the supervisors. It's an election year. Election year is when money matters. And here we are. So they did not take up the ordinance after 5 delays. They decided to let the pharma industry do some local programs and do some voluntary things, and they're going to take it back up in November. And we've been hearing that there's been an offer made to the sheriff for $1 million to go ahead and do the program themselves. But that's not producer responsibility. It's paying the government, and we know that law enforcement is the last place you want them. Not because it's not good or the bin, but it's just that most people won't go in there because a lot of people are afraid either they've done something illegal, they don't want to be on camera, they don't want their friends to think that their son did something wrong. Whatever it is, they won't go in. So about 7% of the meds will be collected through law enforcement. Most are at hospitals and pharmacies. In Snohomish County, Washington passed their ordinance June 14th, an hour after LA County did not pass theirs. So the momentum wasn't slowed down for very long. And then Santa Barbara County passed the week after. This is the first vote we lost. It's actually 4-1. I have to change that slide. There was one supervisor who did not vote for it. But basically unanimous until that one. Now, what happened with we had a sharps bill this year with Assemblymember Phil Ting from San Francisco, which we're trying it again. He was very frustrated. This time, last year, we had Republican and Democratic votes, and we got all the way almost to the end of the first process, first House. This year, we couldn't even get out of the first policy committee. This, again, reflects an election year. Do not take on the biggest well-moneyed lobbyists during an election year when everybody's holding fundraisers and they give a lot of money. It just doesn't work. Somehow, it doesn't get out. So Eli Lilly came to us and said, you know what? we didn't like this approach of AB 45, the slash and burn local preemption bill. We think that we should talk. Our people internally have been saying for years they can do this. Let us at it. Let's talk, but we've got to get facts because our industry partners do not believe there's a problem, and we are not agreeing on what the baseline is. So we said, okay, that sounds like a plan. Let's put in a request for the state auditor who is well respected, and by the way, happens to be his sister, Elaine Howell. This is Dan Howell. And he said she won't talk to me about this during the whole process because that's a very high integrity thing. But they're very well respected and do very good research. So, but the state takes, it's like several $100,000 to do these studies. They're very intense. So we wrote a letter with Dan and said, please do the state audit, get the baseline facts out there about the existing programs, what they cost, do they work, don't they, look at other countries, et cetera. Phil Ting, with Assemblymember Phil Ting, with Senator Jackson, and also with member Adam Gray, all Democrats, but from pretty much the entire political spectrum, submitted a letter saying we should do this audit. The State Audit Committee said yes. The Joint Audit Committee said yes right away. So they've already started. In fact, Maggie's already getting 3 days of an audit where they're going to come sit in her office and look at all the data and all of that for San Francisco. And they're going to do that, and I've heard they're talking to DTSC. They're going to start talking to maybe some of you. If you've, like I think, Patty, maybe you might get visited about your retail take-back. So they're going to look at the whole gamut and then come back with this report and actually recommendations on what the state can do to move this forward without having any more of this morass in the Capitol. So we are starting also with stakeholder negotiations. We're starting to what we call set the table for a constructive discussion. And while the audit report is going on, we are working with these offices, and it'll be me with a bunch of lobbyists and other people, and it looks like about 17 of us are going to start this discussion next month about how do we actually move this ball forward. So fingers crossed we can get there. So that's kind of the big process of what's been going on with medicines and sharps. I can tell you Chicago had a hearing last week. They're seriously about going after their ordinance and apparently had great public turnout, great testimony. We're getting pinged from many other counties, which I will not talk about until they go public in the Midwest and other places. So California, once again, is leading the way. Thanks to all of you for all that you do. And we'll turn it back over to one of the other panelists. Okay.
Just a moment here while we get the next one up.
All right. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing Tim. And Tim is a resource planner from the County of Santa Cruz. He writes and speaks widely on environmental issues and is well known for his pioneering new approaches to innovative programs. Tim.
Thank you, Doug. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here on a late afternoon after lunch when everybody's ready for a nap. There are some things that are unique about the Santa Cruz program, and those provide some lessons for other programs that you may be thinking of starting in your area. And to really understand what's going on in Santa Cruz County, you have to go back a ways. As the slide says, we started a voluntary drug take-back program in Santa Cruz County way back in 2008. So we've been doing this for 8 years. We began with a small cow recycle grant, which covered the cost of the take-back bins. We went out to the pharmacies and started signing up partners. We got a great response from the local independent pharmacies, not so much at first from the chains, with the exception, I must say, of Walgreens. They were very cooperative from the very beginning, and I will say more about that. Because there weren't a lot of models at that time, we had to design a lot of this from scratch. We sourced the bins. You can see there one of the bins we use, and I'm going to show you some other models and tell you more about those. We came up with our own signage, both for the pharmacy counters and for the bins themselves, talking about what can and can't go in the bin. We did our own publicity, and we researched the laws and regulations on collection and disposal and hired a firm to do that for us, and it's been going off largely without a hitch ever since. This is a map of Santa Cruz County showing you some of our take-back locations. This is actually a little bit out of date. There are now in excess of 40 participating locations. And you'll note the color key. We have some locations that are only accepting sharps, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute, and others that are accepting both drugs and sharps. But as you can see, they're scattered throughout the county. The gray areas are largely rural, mountainous areas where there aren't very many people. Most residents of Santa Cruz County are no more than a few miles from a take-back site. So here's a more detailed view of a typical collection kiosk. There are different models. They come in different sizes. The one on the left has a dual key system if you want to make sure that it requires two people to access your box. In some locations, they want to be sure that it requires the collector and somebody from the pharmacy to access the box. On the right is a single key system. That's what we're mostly using. You can see that the hatch at the top where you actually drop off the medications is also lockable. And DeVault is the manufacturer of this type, although there are a few other manufacturers as well. And this is a typical Sharps collection box. The first thing that jumps out at you is that it's bright red. We wanted to make sure that they were very different, that anyone could immediately tell which was which. We didn't want people getting confused about what goes where. As it says on the left there, these are outdoor capable. They're very sturdy. They're designed to be locked down securely to a concrete base. I mean, you can probably tell it looks a lot like a mailbox. It's designed in much the same way, except they're even sturdier. So they work very well in outdoor locations. And I'm going to show you where we're using some of those. Sharps disposal containers, we learned, are a very important part of a Sharps take-back operation. Just about all pharmacies that sell Sharps also sell Sharps disposal containers. They're not cheap. And what a lot of people who use medical Sharps will do is buy one and keep it maybe on their bathroom counter. When it fills up, they dump it out into a paper, plastic bag, a bleach bottle, some other convenient container, and they take that for disposal. So we've heard a lot of horror stories from pharmacists of people showing up, even with handfuls of Sharps, asking, what do I do with these? Obviously not the ideal solution. So as part of our beginning program, we secured many thousands of these and distributed them widely through the pharmacies and elsewhere. But we also made room in our new ordinance for a provision for Sharps disposal containers, and we'll get to that in a minute. Law enforcement participation has been really crucial. Until very recently, federal law and regulations stipulated that collection of controlled substances could only take place under the supervision of law enforcement personnel. That meant that common medications like Vicodin, OxyContin, methadone, other common but powerful painkillers couldn't go back to the pharmacy. They had to go to a law enforcement location. So because of that, we provided bins at all of our local police departments, all of our sheriff stations and substations. They're in non-monitored locations. There was concern that some people might be nervous about going to the police department to drop off their meds. So they're easy to get to, and they are very popular. They're used a lot. I should mention that the federal laws and regulations have changed. California's regulations are kind of catching up to that. But if you're just thinking about beginning a program, it will probably be okay for people to just commingle those medications with other medications and drop them off at the pharmacy or other locations. So the whole process is about to get simpler, we believe. And I want to say one other thing about the law enforcement aspect of this. For them, because they were not allowed to use our private collection service, that meant that whatever they collected, they had to have an officer transport for disposal. Well, some of our local police departments are small, and the disposal site is pretty far away. And freeing up a uniformed officer to spend most of a day or a whole day transporting medications for disposal was a real problem for some of these small departments. So what we arranged in Santa Cruz County, since the sheriff's office is bigger, they were going anyway. On the days when they're going to the disposal site, they make the rounds of the local police departments, collect their meds, and they take them all together. No need to make 5 separate trips. Hey, this is what a drug take-back bin looks like on site. This is a Walgreens in Santa Cruz County. You can see that it doesn't take up a lot of space. It's kind of unobtrusive, doesn't get in anybody's way. It's very accessible. In areas that are considering ordinances, often representatives of the pharmaceutical manufacturers get up and talk about all the nightmares that might ensue if these programs are adopted and we actually have bins like this in pharmacy waiting rooms. What could happen? Well, this is what happens. It's not a problem. Okay, a few words about sharps. In the beginning, like most of the ordinances, we focused on meds, but we have for a long time had a lot of concern in our community about proper sharps disposal. I'm sure that's true for many of you as well. They turn up on the beaches, in the parks, on the streets. It's a big problem. And so our Board of Supervisors was asking us, what can you do about this? Isn't there some way that we can make disposal a little easier? Well, we had some locations where we had sharp bins and people could take them back, but they said, we need more of these. We need everybody who's part of the problem to be part of the solution. So in 2014, we wrote an ordinance saying, basically, if you sell sharps, you got to take them back. You need to be part of the solution. We didn't mandate the kiosk approach. We offered those at no cost to the pharmacies, and many of them accepted them. But we also said that if you prefer, you can provide your customers with prepaid mail-back containers at no cost. And if you'd like to go that route, that's fine. That meets our needs. To our surprise, a number of them have chosen that process, particularly the chains. They have some nervousness about having sharps take-back bins on their premises, worries about accidents, worries about what kind of people that might attract. We think that's a bunch of nonsense, but there is an alternative. Mailback is quite a bit more expensive, so we're waiting to see if that really stands up as a long-term option. But for now, it is an option. And every pharmacy in Santa Cruz County now provides sharps take-back either on-site or by mailback. So at about that same time, some of my colleagues were moving forward with drug take-back ordinances, and the Alameda County case was wending its way through the courts. We began talking about doing something similar. The powers that be decided, let's wait and see what the courts say. But the day after the Supreme Court declined to take the case, we pulled the trigger. We went ahead with our own ordinance. And based on our experience, we did a few things differently. As Heidi mentioned, we rolled sharps into our ordinance, so now everybody who sells drugs and or sharps must provide a take-back option for both. Something you're going to hear about from the other counties is the concept of convenience zones, and basically that says you have to provide a certain level of convenience for disposal. There have to be so many sites in each of these locations. We decided to not go that way because we were already mandating that all the pharmacies participate in sharps take-back. We said we're just going to tell them they all have to do drug take-back too. We also have bins at all of our public health facilities, and as you can see from this picture, we have sharps bins in some public facilities. This is outside of our county courthouse. It's right by the curb on a busy street. I often see people stopping by here on their way to work in the morning, dropping off containers of medical sharps that are probably used for patients with diabetes or other health conditions that need a convenient place to get rid of their sharps. It fills up fast. As I mentioned, sharps disposal containers are a really important part of the process. Something we did that I think we were the first to do was we stipulated that if you sell sharps, every time you make a sale, you have to say, here's a free safe disposal container, please use it. We don't want to see any more paper bags full of needles. Our ordinance provides that we can tell the manufacturers we want additional public sharps bins in other locations. And I'm gonna back up a minute to give some background that we haven't discussed yet. So what we asked the manufacturers to do was set up a stewardship organization. There are literally thousands of drug manufacturers. We don't want to deal with them all separately, so we said, you come up with someone to represent you. That's the stewardship organization. They set up a group called the Pharmaceutical Product Stewardship Working Group, or PPSWG. So that's who we're all negotiating with. And they're setting up organizations for each participating county to represent them. So that is the stewardship organization, and they're responsible for running these programs. Because we already have a program, we're not starting from scratch, we said, by the way, we're adopting a very aggressive deadline. Some of my colleagues allowed up to a year and a half from the passage of the ordinance to the implementation of the program. We said, look, you've been working on theirs for a year and a half. We've got a program that's up and running. This should be pretty simple for you. We're going to give you 6 months. And if for any reason you're not ready at that point, that's okay. We're going to keep running it, and we're going to send you the bill. We've actually just arrived at that point. They didn't meet our aggressive deadline, but we believe they're acting in good faith. They have submitted 2 versions of a stewardship plan. The first one was not very close. We rejected it. The second one was a lot better, but not quite there. We asked them to tune it up in a couple of areas. We're pretty confident the third version will be what we're looking for. And during the question and answer period, if you like, we can get into details of those plans. But during this interim period, we're going to expect them to bear the cost. We are requiring an extensive outreach and education program. And to the extent that the county bears any cost just for overseeing this program, they will be responsible for those as well. So our ordinance has just recently taken effect, and as I said, our existing program is ongoing. We're getting plans from the stewardship organization and now negotiating the details with them. It has been extremely helpful working with the other counties that have ordinances. If you're considering that, I encourage you not to go it alone, but to consult with those who have gone before. Not only are there important lessons to be learned, but it's very powerful to work together and to present a united front. Local cities in our county are passing their ordinances. In some counties, the county health department has jurisdiction over the entire county, including the cities. Our county is not one of those. So even though we've passed an ordinance governing all the unincorporated areas of the county, each of our local cities has to pass their own ordinance. And as Heidi alluded to, the city of Santa Cruz just did so today. Go Santa Cruz. We expect the others to follow shortly. So it doesn't have to just happen at the county level. It can happen at the individual city level. And I've talked long enough. If you'd like to see our ordinance or the other supporting documentation, there is our website address, and I will take questions when we're done. Thank you. Doug doesn't get to talk very much. Mine doesn't want to go down. We'll get there, don't worry.
Secret ways.
Ah, nice picture.
Jim, we'll see. Okay, our next speaker is Wayman Wong, and Wayman has over 18 years experience in the field of hazardous materials management, environmental compliance regulation, and emergency response coordination. Wayman manages the county's household hazardous waste program and pollution prevention program, advancing EPR concepts and ordinances, and the hazardous materials emergency response program, and he works for San Mateo County. Welcome, Wayman.
Oh, thank you, everyone. Glad you can stick around. I know it's getting late. We want to get you out here as soon as possible. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the making of the sausage, the internal workings of an ordinance. I'm going to be talking mostly about the 4 counties you see here. Essentially, all of our ordinances are very much the same. We have the same backbone. There's a couple of variations to it, but we all started off in the same process in that at some point, all of us were funding and managing our own meds collection program, whether it's through our law enforcement agencies, just like with Tim, or through pharmacies within their counties. For us, so we started our program in 2006 at law enforcement agencies. We started off with 3, then quickly moved up to 14 stations. But we knew that it grew very quickly. In that time period, we've collected over 80 tons of meds. We knew people wanted the service. And in 2015, we conducted a survey with CPSC, with CPSC's help, and most residents told us that they wanted to participate at pharmacies. That's where they really wanted to drop off their meds. The only negative feedback we ever got from residents was the fact that they didn't want to go to law enforcement agencies to drop off their meds. I mean, how often do you actually go to the police station, voluntary or involuntarily? Hopefully not involuntarily. But we know that people want to do the right thing. They want to do the right thing, and our job is to try to make it as easy and convenient as possible. And as Tim mentioned earlier, there were some changes in regulation that have certainly helped that fact. We all started many of our programs through law enforcement agencies to begin with, but with changes with the Controlled Substances Act, changes in DEA regulation, that really allowed for all this commingling of controlled substances and non-controlled substances, making us, or giving us the opportunity to expand our programs into pharmacies, retail pharmacies, and hospital clinic pharmacies. So that's where we knew the public's going to participate. We certainly couldn't do it on our own. Local governments were faced with limited budgets, diminishing budgets, so we needed to turn to an alternative, and that's where going to what Heidi alluded to earlier is EPR. We needed the industry's help in expanding this program into the pharmacies. Now, the industry obviously has the infrastructure, they have the financial capabilities to sustain this type of collection program, and we knew that that was the only way to do this was to go through a local ordinance. Now, with certainly having a federal program would have been ideal, even a state program, but without getting any traction, the local ordinance was the final alternative for us, and we went through this along with those other jurisdictions I mentioned earlier. So as we move forward, what are we talking about essentially? What we're talking, here's the scope of who's in and who's out. Ostensibly what we're talking about are all drugs. We're talking controlled substances, prescription drugs, non-prescription, over-the-counter, those types. What's not included, supplements, personal care products. So we did have to make that distinction to narrow the band of who we're looking at. But we certainly, as we look at the public, when we say medicine to them, we want it to be fairly simple for them to identify. No restrictions about, again, over-the-counter and prescribed, controlled, and all that. That's too many variations for them to have to work through. So we felt like this was simple enough that it gets the majority of the meds out of there. Now, one of the problems that we're faced with now is an issue with combined products, where you notice that we're not talking about sharps here. In our ordinance, we passed one without sharps, and fortunately, Tim has one that includes sharps. So a product like EpiPens, which has a drug in it, but is also a sharp. Now you've got a jump ball about which one it is and how it's going to be managed in the future. So moving forward, having something like a meds and sharps together would be ideal. Within the ordinances that we've passed, there's requirements for the various participants throughout the supply chain. With the wholesalers, there's requirements for them to report to us who their producers are, who they are buying their drugs from. With the retailers, repackagers, the expectations from them is that they verify that the producers are providing, they have some intent to participate in a program, whether it's individually or through the PPSWG, as Tim mentioned earlier. And of course, the producers bear ultimate responsibility in managing the program, funding, designing the entirety of the collection. Now, when we look at what those producers are required to do, they're required to submit stewardship plans. These stewardship plans give us the blueprint of what they'll be doing for us, how they're going to be meeting our goals, how they're going to provide collection services to the residents, whether it's specifically through kiosks, how many kiosks they're going to have, where they're going to be located, again, whether it's law enforcement agencies, retail pharmacies, hospital clinic pharmacies, give us that understanding of what they're planning on doing. Also, mail-back options for the homebound, people that are unable to go to a retail pharmacy, and even one-day take-backs in case they're unable to meet certain standards that we have. And especially for someone like San Mateo County, we have a coast side that is fairly sparsely populated, so you don't have a lot of options for collection kiosks in those locations. So we still want to make sure that there's convenient options for them as well. Another thing that's required of the producers is that they promote the program. Simply put, they need to let people know what program exists, where those kiosks are, because we know if that's not promoted, there's going to be not going to be enough participation, and the program's not going to be successful. So very important for them to educate and promote their program throughout, with whether it's through multimedia, websites, 800 phone number. We also require them to do a biannual survey of the residents to make sure they're aware of the program and the accessibility for them. Tim alluded to this earlier. We have a convenience standard. This is the one thing that's slightly different for each of the counties that you see listed up there. None of us have a requirement for the retail pharmacies to participate in this program. So what we've done is put in a standard of convenience that each of the counties felt would be representative of their county. So in San Mateo County's case, we chose one kiosk or one collection site for every 20,000 residents, a minimum of 5 per supervisor or district. There's 5 supervisors, but when you add up the total, it's roughly 37, at minimum, 37 collection sites throughout the county. Now, the one thing that we have in there that that helps us is that the industry is required to accept anybody that is willing to participate. So if more than 37 sites, more than 37 pharmacies want to participate, the producers are required to accept them into the program. So they'll be providing the kiosk for them and providing the collection service at that location. Cost recovery, that was very important to us as well, knowing that we needed a mechanism in there to recover the costs that we're going to incur in overseeing the program, whether it's reviewing the plans that are currently in our possession right now, going through that process, but also administering in the future, operating it. Some of us have had to pass specific ordinances or resolutions that allow for our organization to charge an organization like PPSWG. Others have already have that mechanism. So if you have that thought process, make sure that you go through that as well. Make sure the fees are aligned with what you'll need to recover your costs for operating this. So as you guys move forward with any type of ordinance, as Tim mentioned earlier, it's important to really learn from what other people have done, participate in our group calls, or there's other PSI, Product Stewardship Institute calls, talking about this issue, just to get a frame of reference and to see some of the challenges. Now, we've faced a lot of challenges. Sometimes you don't know about these challenges until you actually go through the process. So a couple of things that we've learned through going, as we've gone through this process is, number one, languages and terminology. Making sure that what we know to be a specific word like wholesalers, if it means the same to the producers. A couple of new terms that I had never heard of until recently, something like third-party logistics or contract manufacturer, those types of things, I've never dealt with before. Understanding that now, you could craft a better ordinance in the future. The industry. It's a very complex, fluid industry. People are moving, people are international, they're buying each other out. There's a difference between incorporated, LLC, company. A company could have the same name, but if it's a Inc. versus a LLC, they're completely different. So things like that, we're only starting to understand now. The politics behind it. We were prepared for the industry to fight this, to push back. What we didn't realize was some of the other factors that might undermine the programs that we were planning to have in place, whether it was redefining home-generated pharmaceuticals as a hazardous waste, or having legislation that would move pharmaceuticals or medicine into a door-to-door household hazardous waste collection. Those types of things we didn't foresee. Issues that we're having with the Board of Pharmacy, who's developing their own regulations that may or may not facilitate an easy or smoother transition for our programs. Those are the kinds of concerns that we didn't think about or weren't on our radar, and as we've gone through the process, we've seen a lot of those challenges pop up.
Or expect from your own legislators.
Or from your own legislators, your own local legislators.
45 is his district.
Yeah. Surprise, surprise. And of course, the implementation process, going through that now, lots of lessons learned. We wrote this ordinance to allow for individual companies to produce a plan or provide some type of collection services or get together as a whole. Now, looking back on it, we're starting to see, we've seen at least one individual small company with a small amount of waste attempt to provide a small plan that would narrowly focus their collection. Our ordinances didn't really account for that type of submittal. So again, these are the lessons we learned as we've gone through the process. And I hope if you guys are considering an ordinance, come talk to us, join some of the calls just to get some feedback and background so you don't make the same mistakes we did. And I expect that any ordinance, just like Tim's ordinance that followed ours, is going to be better than the last. And that's what we're hoping for, that there's improvements every time along the way. All right, thank you.
That will disappear. Okay, and our last speaker is Maggie Johnson. Maggie works for the City and County of San Francisco. Maggie has over 30 years of professional experience in the management of hazardous and solid waste. At the department, she is responsible for the oversight of the city's HHW programs and finding a place for all those items that can't be managed through a 3-cart collection system. Here's Maggie.
Thank you. Good afternoon. We have a little change from the program, which was submitted a long time ago. I'm going to actually be talking about our multi-county disposal, multi-county work group, which we're using to implement our safe medicine disposal ordinances. So as you've heard, you've seen this slide before, in 2015, 4 contiguous counties in the Bay Area, San Francisco, San Mateo, Santa Clara, and Marin, each passed a local ordinance which required pharmaceutical manufacturers to provide and operate a permanent and sustainably funded program for our residents to safely dispose of their medicines, their prescription medicines and their over-the-counter medicines. As you can see, our ordinances all passed pretty quickly, usually about a month or two apart. And so we decided it would be a good thing to work together. And the ordinances are very similar, as you've heard. Really, the only difference is the convenience standards, which are based on the density and the different kinds of demographics in each of our counties. Each of the ordinances do have this same implementation timeline in them, and basically a lot of text up here, but really what happens is that the producers, medicine producers, have 1 year to submit a written stewardship plan to each county. Then each county will review and approve or reject the plan. And if it's approved, then within another 90 days, 3 months, the stewardship plan is expected to be operational. In the early part of the ordinance timelines, there's a lot of information coming in. We're finding out who the producers are that are selling in our county. We're doing that through the wholesalers, repackagers, and retailers. And then kind of in the second half of that first year, the producers themselves are notifying us that they understand they're supposed to be participating. And then 90 days later, who is going to be representing them, or if they're going to represent themselves. So that generated a lot of data, and one of the first things that we decided to do was coordinated reporting. This was good for us, as you might not be too surprised to hear. None of our ordinances really had resources for us to implement the ordinances, so we were interested in efficiency, but it also turned out to be good for the regulated community. They really liked this. They could submit their data for one or all of the 4 counties. It was online reporting through this little program called WUFU, and it's really been a great tool. We're going to be expanding this to the wholesalers who, unlike everyone else, the wholesalers have an annual obligation to report to us who the producers are selling in our counties. So all this data generated a master list of potential producers. This was a summary of all the data that the wholesalers and the retailers and the repackagers provided to us. And we used this list, and we will continue to use this list, but we used it initially for advertising our joint webinar that we held for producers in November. It was hosted by Heidi. She was the moderator. And the ordinance, you saw some of Wayman's slides came from the webinar, but it was basically an introduction. So if you'd like to see the webinar, it's still available on YouTube, and there's links on all of our county websites. The backbone of our work group has been weekly conference calls, which we've had pretty much since September of 2015. This is a great time for us to get together and share our experiences, share our ideas, and as the other counties have passed ordinances, Tim in Santa Cruz and most recently Santa Barbara, they've been invited to join the conference calls. We also have pretty regular participation with the implementation folks in Alameda County and in King County, Washington. So although we do work together when possible, each county will be receiving an individual plan, and each county has the individual obligation to review that plan and approve or reject it. And each county will also be doing independent enforcement. And I would just like to point out that the enforcement in this case would be on the producers, not on the product stewardship organization. So hopefully it won't be necessary, but if it is, it's the producers. So each of the counties has a dedicated email address, so it doesn't all come to me personally, and the websites. It's really been just a great experience for me working with my colleagues. It's, as Tim said, it's powerful to work together. It's also comforting to work together when you start these things. It's a little bit scary sometimes. You don't know what to do first, and we've got a lot of experience. And as Wayman said, we found out a lot of things we didn't know. So it's good to have somebody to talk about that with. And before we take questions, which we're all happy to do, I would just like to invite all of you, any of you who are interested in passing an ordinance, please pass your ordinance and join the work group.
Okay, let's open this up to questions. Sean.
You talk about enforcement. What kind of punitive capital? Do you chase them with fines? You send out a letter originally for those that are not participating? Do you ban them from selling into the marketplace?
The free riders referring to? Well, I don't think it would be too politically popular to ban people from selling medicine. So that's not really an option, I think, with this product, I mean, realistically. So the ordinances all have pretty much the same, or are 4 anyway. I won't speak for Tim because his ordinance is somewhat different. But we have to send a 30-day warning letter, and we have both civil and criminal penalties, which would be, would have to go through the usual kind of enforcement process. all our ordinances, the 4 ordinances, also have a private right of action. So if we don't act, then the other producers could take action, I believe it's civil, only civil action, of course, against any free riders. But the enforcement, I was actually talking about, we would do that kind of enforcement independently, but I was also talking about the enforcement on the producers who have notified us, and if they're not in compliance, if their plan is basically not operating as it's described in the written plan, then they would potentially be in violation.
I would add that the stewardship organization we talked about has already signed up hundreds of members, represents well over 90% of all the medications sold in the United States, and close to 99% of all the sharps. So while there may be some small free riders, they're not a significant dent in the overall program.
Okay, way in the back.
I just have one question that I'm not sure if you can actually answer yet.
Could you speak up? I'm sorry.
Has any pharmaceutical company just said, well, you know what, we're not going to sell in that county? I'm not saying that anybody has, but I'm just wondering if they've been that.
So I mentioned earlier that there's been a couple of producers that have asked us about or sent in individual plans because they've stated that they sell a very specific drug to a very narrow population. I can't say for a fact that they have chosen to or not to sell in the county, but that is something that they would consider. I mean, anecdotally, some have stated that. I don't know if that's a fact that they have stopped selling in the county.
Well, I'll add to this because Alameda County actually allowed for these little guys to break off, do their own program, and they did approve a plan where this company knows they have 5 patients. They know exactly who they are. They're sending them an envelope. They can put whatever pills they want in it. The company will pay for them all. And that's their plan. It's 1 page long. It's awesome. And they approved it. There's a couple things I want you guys to know that we found out recently, at least from our attorney, that PPSWG has set up so there's different kinds of nonprofits. PPSWG set up as a C6 under the IRS code. What that means is they only are legally responsible to protect their members. They have no public good requirement at all. My concern is we are getting calls from these little companies that are being forced to pay $30,000 to get a plan review in the counties. And they are really concerned because that's a lot of money to a company that's like a little boutique company. It's got maybe just a couple of patients. And we don't want this to look like it's not business friendly because that wasn't the intent. So this is one of those things, lessons learned you can know of and pay attention to. Because the other thing is, these companies are being asked to pay $40,000 a year to PPSWG. And PPSWG can turn around and say, we're going to use that to lobby against these other ordinances in LA and stuff because we think that's for our member benefit. Or we want to stall because we think that's for our member benefit. So interesting. Maybe you also look to require that it be a C3, which is a public good benefit. You have to protect public good. I don't know. We're still looking into that. I think the lawyers have to weigh in at this point. We just raised this question about a month ago when our attorney raised it to us and said, why is Thermostat Recycling Corporation a C6? That was a big mistake. You let them do that. And so now we're starting to look. None of the other attorneys at the state or anywhere else raised this question. But my nonprofit attorney is really good at what she does in San Francisco, and she said, you better look into this. So, but I really want to allow the little guys to go off and do a little program that's simple, that they can comply, because the goal is not to make their life harder, charge them outrageous fees. It's to get the pills back and make sure the public and their customers are educated.
Something you can anticipate if you go down this road is that representatives of the pharmaceutical companies are going to come forward at public hearings or other venues and predict all sorts of dire consequences.
Yes.
And one of the things we heard, not from the small companies, but from some of the big ones, is, well, we may just have to stop selling drugs in your county. We didn't believe them. We called their bluff, and nobody has stopped selling drugs in our county.
And Bear did not leave Alameda County. Bear was threatening Alameda County. They would leave the entire county.
Yeah.
So far, they're still there.
Okay, next question, Julie.
So it is my understanding that the stewardship organizations are submitting plans that include prominently featuring home disposal in the outreach to residents. And Maggie knows how much heartburn this gives me. And my understanding is several communities have approved these plans with that in there. And partly because, the pharmaceutical companies are threatening their First Amendment, lawsuits and things like that. And, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on how to avoid this in the future. Would we have done anything differently in how the laws were written? I'm thinking if I'm just average resident, I see, I have the option of taking it back to my pharmacy or just throwing it away in my trash can. I'm going to just throw it away in my trash can, right? And worst case scenario, though, it might go in a compost bin or something like that. Recology is seeing pharmaceuticals in their composting very consistently and very recently lately. So it's just some fears I have.
Part of the problem is confusion at the level of the federal regulatory agencies. The Drug Enforcement Administration, for example, still tells people, flush it, throw it in the trash, that's fine. The Environmental Protection Agency says, don't do that, that's terrible for the environment. So the industry can logically claim that there's some uncertainty and they're within their rights to follow the DEA guidelines. It's something that we're all wrestling with. The industry has pushed back pretty hard on this. I mentioned that in Santa Cruz County we had rejected their last plan, and one of the reasons we said is that we don't want any mention of home disposal in here. The draft literature they submitted said, in the absence of a convenient alternative, home disposal is fine. We said, well, the whole point of this is to create a convenient alternative. We don't need to talk about home disposal. We're going to see how hard they push back on that. You guys might want to add something.
Yeah, in San Francisco, we took a little different route. We did approve the plan with conditions, but we also passed regulations. And the regulations were primarily entirely about outreach, the kinds of outreach that we expect the product stewardship organizations to be doing. And among them, and it also specifies certain messages. And one of them is to actively discourage flushing and trashing, or in-home disposal, as I like to call it. But in addition, in the regulations, it says that they can only advertise the programs that they're providing. So we'll see, how that goes out. Like Tim said, there's everybody's kind of wrestling with this. Everybody's kind of circling around, kind of waiting to see what the end result is. But it's another way that working together and holding not necessarily a totally uniform approach, but at least discussing among ourselves how we're going to do this. It's been really very helpful and very supportive.
So having to do that again, including that in the ordinance to begin with, would have been helpful.
Yes.
So this gives you some ability to put those types of restrictions in place, so you narrow what they can and cannot say in their advertising outreach material.
Yeah.
But I will say to that, though, that sometimes it's better not to put that in the political arena where it's contested. We did our regulations, we did a notice of them, we heard nothing from the pharmaceutical industry, whereas they were, I won't say they were swarming over us when we passed the ordinance, but they were a lot. So sometimes, giving yourself the ability to do regulations and then doing it that way might be a little more easier path.
And I would also say the pharmaceutical industry has, they're really good at, kind of putting information out there through venues that may not look like it's really them. So you might have seen that, full page ad in the New Yorker cost $180,000 a few months ago. Coffee grounds with pills in them. Just throw your pills in the coffee grounds. Then there was a full page ad, probably about the same amount of money. I don't know exactly on that one. It was in another national magazine, and it was putting pills in kitty litter. So it was the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids. And when you look for who the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids, it's Bristol Myers Squibb and a whole bunch. CHPA, the people, the Consumer Health Products Association, which was outed in the LA Times for calling seniors in LA and telling them that their drug prices would skyrocket and and all that. So there's a lot of smoke and mirrors going on out there. It all seems to be boiling back down to the same group, but they have a lot of money for messaging. So just got to know that it's out there.
They can't afford drug take back, but they can spend it. And I'm wondering about opposing it.
Yes.
Okay, I
They
saw
have some
a
nice
hand back here.
logos with nice suits.
When you mentioned that you have the convenience standards, was that 1 in 20,000 people?
I'm sorry?
The convenience standards.
Yeah, so it's one collection site for every 20,000 residents.
Okay, and how did you come up with that number?
We just looked at the rough population, and we have about 750,000 people in our county. And as we mapped out where those locations were and number of residents, we felt like that number should adequately serve that amount of people.
And then if you mentioned EpiPens also, if you were to rewrite the ordinance, how would you include that?
Sharps. Just include
sharps.
Include sharps in
Yeah.
there, and that will solve that issue.
Yeah.
And let me add something to that, if I may, and then we'll get to your question. Partly because of federal regulations and partly on their own initiative, the industry is seeking to exclude an ever-growing list of products from our take-back programs. So in our case, what we're telling them is fine. If you don't want it in the bin, tell us what your plan is for providing easy, convenient, free disposal of these products. We're not going to let them off the hook. If they want to provide mail-back containers or some other mechanism, that's fine. But we expect them to take care of all of their products.
And just one more comment about convenience standards. One of the critical reasons why we have that in place is because we want an equitable distribution of these collection sites. We decided not to go the route of requiring all retail pharmacies to participate. Now, for us in San Mateo County, that would have been a difficult fight to not only take on the pharmaceutical industry, but now to take on a fight with local retailers. We chose not to take that route at that time. It may be different now, so that's something you might want to consider as you move forward.
Well, something exciting that happened at the Board of Pharmacy meeting last week is Kaiser actually got up and said for the first time, we support producer responsibility because we want to do this and we can't pay for it. And we were just like, wow, that's the first time we heard Kaiser say that. So if you have a Kaiser, say, hey, your lobbyist Stephen Gray says, because they
Yes,
might
sir.
help you now.
Yeah, I'm trying to think into the future as for the 4 or 5 or let's say about 30 to 10 cities that have this program running. Are we hearing any upstream solutions from some of these pharmaceutical companies? Because we have to, this conference has been about waste reduction and etc. And so as we are dealing with the downstream solutions now, putting that responsibility on the producers, are we hearing something from them coming up also with upstream solutions to as well? Because I know that sometimes most of these drugs are generated because people are not in compliance, people are not taking their drugs to as well. And so are they coming up, some of these product stewardship companies, which are being set up by these pharmaceutical companies, are they coming up with maybe publicity to encourage people to, I don't know whether it's allowed for them to tell people that they have to take all their drugs or something, whether it's legally the right thing to do. But we know that is where the problem is coming from to us. So are we hearing some upstream solutions from them?
So this discussion isn't necessarily happening between us and this group. But what I will say that we do recognize that part of the upstream solution is how drugs are prescribed, how much is distributed at any one time, whether it's a month's supply, et cetera. We recognize that that's a problem, and that's been part of the discussion, but in this case between us and PPSWG, that hasn't been the case of us encouraging or pushing them to a certain direction on how they're going to manage their upstream efforts.
But you are touching on one of the fundamental principles of extended producer responsibility. The reason that we set up these programs is to provide an incentive for producers to think about how can we waste less? How can we design and market our products so there is less of a disposal problem at the end of life? And we are seeing at least the beginnings of some efforts. Some of the serious prescription drugs, for example, they're now being dispensed in smaller quantities, although that's at least as much because of issues like overdoses as because of the disposal problem. But we're seeing especially interesting developments among sharps manufacturers. They recognize the problem, and especially when annoying counties like mine say, now you've got to pay for disposal containers, they're getting creative.
Yeah.
So more and more medical sharps now come in a container that is also a disposal container. If you or a family member use medical sharps, you might have seen these. Some of them, for example, they have an opening on one side where you take out the injector before you're going to use it. And when you're done with it, there's a hole on the other side that you put it in when you're done. So when you're through, it's already contained. That container can go back to the disposal site. We expect to see a lot more of that sort of thing.
Okay, in the middle, hold on, John, and then in the back, and then Sean. Do you still have your question? No? Okay, let's go to the back.
Yes. For the last 8-9 years, I've been actively participating in homeless encampment cleanups, as well as creek cleanups that are also partially homeless encampment cleanups. In any of the ordinances that exist now, is there any language that holds pharmacies responsible or hold them to take steps of responsibility when issuing meds or sharps to patients that are identified as homeless?
No, and that could be an improvement. I mean, if you want to, give us some ideas on language, that would be great. Because, I mean, we're being asked to give people models all the time. I'm getting phone calls from folks all over the country saying, what's the best model? And I can tell you, I think today it's probably Los Angeles, even though it didn't pass. They did call, I think, probably all of you and did a whole lot of work and research on that, even though since then we've even heard about the C3, C6 thing, and we don't know if we change it, and then probably a few things we change from that. But we'd love to have other ideas like that because there's more coming, and we want them all to get better and better and better.
Yeah, I don't know for certain, but there is in Santa Clara County, a mobile county program that goes out and treats or provides medical sharps to the homeless. Don't know if when we're out there doing those treatments, all the sharps and meds that we're finding out in the creeks, I don't know if that's a result of this mobile program from the county, but I figure there must be some sort of language ordinance that covers that.
Most of our counties have some kind of needle exchange program, and of course that was implemented largely as a public health measure. It's in everybody's interest that people who are using needles use clean needles so we're not spreading diseases. At least in our county, that includes disposal containers. And one of the things that we've been doing is encouraging everyone who's involved, the needle exchange program as well as the pharmacies, to carry a variety of disposal containers. The kind that we showed you pictures of, the 1 quart or larger containers, they're not convenient for somebody who's maybe camping in the woods. But they come in smaller sizes. There's a type that's about the size of a cigarette case. It'll fit in your pocket. It'll hold 5 to 10 syringes. And those are pretty popular as well.
Sean.
Just curious, what's the main disposal method? Is it incineration for meds?
Yes.
Yeah.
For both.
So we have an option for them to provide alternatives if they can show that there's some environmental benefit to choosing a separate option. But right now, incineration is the required option.
So EPA says the best thing is medical incinerators, and then it's hazardous, right? Hazardous is the top, and then medical? Really?
Large municipal combustors.
And large municipal, but there's new kinds coming out. So there's one that's siting in Salinas right now where we're putting 5 medicine bins. The Army's using it, and it's like a modified blast furnace, and apparently it goes to 4,000 degrees, and this thing's going to incinerate like there's like almost no emissions. And there's one that just sited down in Paramount that's similar. So, and LA County went and tested it with the CARB and said that they almost couldn't detect anything. It was cleaner than anything they've ever seen. So there's more technology coming fast. That's smaller, micro. You could put it in a county. You don't have to ship. Because one of the arguments the industry is using is you have to ship it all the way to Texas and go to Utah. So now the answer is no, we don't. No, we don't. So that's good. And the other thing with sharps is they can actually be autoclaved and then landfilled, or autoclaved and then shredded, and then actually some people are recycling it apparently, or Waste Management has some process to do that. So I think everybody's going to start getting creative.
Best available technology.
Right, best available technology. Make sure that language is in your ordinance so that you can ask for the best available technology.
Before we run out of time, that last question reminded me of something that Heidi touched on, but we should expand on a little bit. In California, the State Board of Pharmacy is in the process of developing regulations that will govern medical take-back programs across the state. And they've delved into a lot of things that maybe they didn't need to, where they might have just simply adopted DEA regulations, for example. They talked about disposal methods. There really wasn't a need for that. We got them to back off on that a little bit. But some of the things that they're suggesting are going to help the spread of these programs. Some of them are going to make it really difficult. So I encourage you to go to the website of the California State Board of Pharmacy. Take a look at their proposed regulations. They've been engaged in this for months. I think we're now on the third iteration.
Yeah, that's been a long.
And you can submit comments online. They hold public hearings. They haven't been super responsive to our comments, but they have made some good changes. And if they hear from more of you, it's bound to help.
Yeah, this is the final 15-day comment period, so this is it. And they got out, they initially were going to preempt local governments, and we're like, you don't have any authority to do that, stop that. And then they had a wall in there, to put a wall between containers. Yeah. So,
there were some really silly rules in there.
The one thing left in right now is that the pharmacist has the right to say, I just can't do this. And the thing that we know when we go and approach the big pharmacies is the pharmacist always says, I cannot make this decision, I have to go to corporate. So we're worried that corporate's really going to make the decision no. And CVS has been very clear, they have no intention of doing it.
And that when the Board of Pharmacy meets, they always have their house counsel there. There's a couple of lawyers, and they asked them, are we on firm ground providing this opt-out? They said, well, not really. We advise you to take that out. They said, thank you, and they kept it in. What their counsel advised them is that this is probably going to lead to a lot of litigation. If, for example, in our county, where we're saying every pharmacy has to participate, but the State Board of Pharmacy says you can decline to participate, well, we're probably going to have to settle that in court if that rule doesn't change. Why they would want to put us or the pharmacy through that, I can't imagine. So if you care to weigh in on that, send them your comments, please do.
Okay, any more questions for the panelists? Okay, I think Heidi has a quick little
if
announcement.
this has driven you to want a drink, we're going to buy you a drink. So the Beneficial State Bank is actually, after our award ceremony, I hope you can all join us. We've got U-Haul Corporate coming in for our Golden Arrow Award to thank them for the Refuel Your Fund campaign and rolling that out, and a bunch of other great companies. So come and thank them all, and then Beneficial State Bank is buying everybody a drink for half an hour so you can mingle with the award winners and say thank you. So hopefully you guys can all join us. We'd love to have you there.
And what room?
Where's the reception?
California room.
So that is downstairs, folks. You've been here enough days, you know where that is. Downstairs, where the elevator is. So let's give a hand to our panelists.
Great job, you guys.